Farmers. Here we are going to learn about the opium farmers and its production. The Indian farmer and opium production. Let us now move to India and see what was happening in the Indian countryside in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. As you know, British rule was gradually established in India after the Battle of Plassey 1757. Over the period of colonial rule, the rural landscape were radically transformed. The British saw land revenue as a major source of government income. In the colonial period, rural India also came to produce a range of crops for the world market. In the early 19th century, indigo and opium were two of the major commercial crops. Let us look at the history of one crop, opium, to get an idea of what colonial rule meant to peasants and the market are operated in the colonies. In India, its cultivation as well as the manufacture and the traffic to China were subject to the East India Company as a strict monopoly of the British government. Test for tea, the trade with China. In the late 18th century, the English East India Company was buying tea and silk from China for sale in England. Tea became a popular English drink. The tea trade became more and more important. In 1785, about 15 million pounds of tea was being imported into England. By 1830, the figure had jumped to over 30 million pounds. It was unloaded in a number of seaports of southeastern China and carried by local agents to the interiors. By the early 1820s, about 10,000 crates were being annually smuggled into China. 15 years later, over 35,000 crates were being unloaded every year. The triangular trade was prominently seen during 18th century. This is a painting by Thomas Daniel, an English artist who came to India with his nephew William Daniel in 1786. The Daniels went first to China, stayed there for a while, and then sailed from Canton in South China to India. The question is, where did opium come from? This is where the Indian peasants come into the story. When the British conquered Bengal, they made a determined effort to produce opium in the lands under their control. As the market for opium expanded in China, larger volumes of opium flowed out of Bengal ports. Before 1767, no more than 500 chests of 2 mounds each were being exported from India. How were unwilling cultivators made to produce opium? In the rural areas of Bengal and Bihar, there were large numbers of poor peasants. They forced them to produce opium. Summary. In this chapter, you saw how rural areas in different parts of the world change in the modern period. It was also a story of displacements and impoverishment, ecological crisis and social rebellion, colonization and repression. We need to look at this variation and strengths to understand the diverse ways in which peasants and farmers confronted the modern world. That is all in this topic. Keep learning.